Anyone fighting for their life in court, even if they've taken the life of another person, will try anything they can to get out of it and convince the judge and jury that they are innocent. As you can imagine, the strange stories some criminals have used to try and remain free are beyond belief. One such story involves a man named Dan White, who assassinated Washington Town Mayor George Wisconsin and Supervisor Harvey Melt. Had his lawyer tried to prove to the people that his client was eating too many Twinkies, which showed he was depressed, and because of the dark feeling he had inside, he went on to commit the murders. In other words, it was not him that did it, it was what was inside his mind that made him do it. There are those who plead insanity when they're perfectly sane. Quite a lot use a full moon defence, claiming that when the crime took place it was a full moon, and the full moon can do strange things to people, make them do things they wouldn't normally do. Sleepwalking is another one. It wasn't their fault they picked up a knife and killed their wife, husband or parents. They were asleep the whole time, so should be given consideration, and the judge should take it easy on them. In this story, I bring you another strange defence for a senseless killing, but, depending on your beliefs, there could be some truth to this one. This is the devil made me do it defence, where the killer claims to have gotten possessed by a demon, an old burnt skinny man to be exact, who took control of his body, then forced him to kill. It's the only time that this defence has ever been attempted in the United States, but did it succeed? Now, there are two sides to this story. On one side we have the paranormal aspect. It's not just some crazy man who randomly claims he was possessed. There's a whole backstory with evidence to support it. On the other side, there is a real crime that took place in the light of day that was extremely violent in nature. This is the story of David Glatzel, who got possessed, and Arnie Johnson, who committed a murder seemingly out of nowhere. Their stories go together in what would become the first murder in Brookfield, Connecticut's 193-year history back in 1981. Arnie claims a demon possessed him, and after hearing the details of this case, maybe you will agree. Brookfield, Connecticut is a town in Fairfield County. Up until the 1970s, it was a quiet town made up of old cotton and paper mills. Around then, a lot of people began to move up to Brookfield from New York City. As a result, a lot of houses were built and new families moved in, including the Glatzel family. Back in the summer of 1980, 26-year-old Debbie Glatzel was living at home in Brookfield at her mum and dad's house. However, things were soon about to change for her. She was planning to move out soon and live with her boyfriend, 29-year-old Arnie Johnson. They'd found a nice home to rent in the area, but being able to afford it came at a price, and they would soon go on to find out it wasn't just monetary. The place was filthy and run down, so the couple got it cheaper than they should have due to them being the ones to have to clean it and fix it up. So on a hot day of that year, Debbie, Arnie and Debbie's 12-year-old brother David headed over to the house to begin the work on it. David wasn't keen on being in the house, helping to do the work. He would rather have been out with his friends. But he did love his sister and future brother-in-law, so felt he should be there with them, helping them out. Once they arrived, Debbie got to work in the kitchen, scraping and cleaning away years' worth of burnt dirt and grease from the oven. Arnie started cleaning the living room, while David went upstairs to see what filth he would have to deal with up there. The house was old, and the wooden stairs creaked as he walked up. The hallway up there was dark, as there weren't any windows. It was the type of house that looked like the previous tenant had lived there for decades, just collecting items and rubbish which had all been left behind. Piles of newspapers and magazines were left in boxes which were piled in the corners of the bedrooms, as if someday these old magazines would be read again. The bedroom floorboards were so heavily caked in dirt that you couldn't work out where one floorboard ended and the next one began, and the overpowering smell of damp and dust was thick in every room. They weren't there for very long before David came running downstairs in a panic, claiming that they weren't the only ones in the house. He said an old man appeared out of nowhere, shoved him, and then threatened him. Due to Arnie being the oldest there and classed himself as the man of the house, he ran upstairs and searched every room up there. There was no man hiding in the wardrobes or under the beds. But David was adamant that what he saw was real. He couldn't work out any features on him, but did describe him as being skinny and burnt. The figure pushed him onto the bed and said if anyone moved into the house, then bad things would happen to the family. Debbie thought this was David's way of getting out of cleaning the rooms, but Arnie disagreed and said it was more than just that. Maybe David didn't want his sister to move away, so made up the creepy man story. It's a good attempt by David, but the couple just weren't buying it. The young boy did appear very shaken though, so they told him they would finish for the day, and after that, Debbie and Arnie would finish the cleaning on their own. So the three of them headed back home. They thought that would be the end of it, but in reality, it was only the beginning. There would be a string of strange events that would end in the murder of one man. Back at home, David just couldn't let the thought of the old burnt man go. It was either a very elaborate attempt to keep the sister at home, or maybe there really was something much darker going on. In the weeks that followed, David started to be affected by night terrors, something that he had never suffered from before. These weren't just nightmares, they were more extreme, and it got to the point where he was afraid to go to sleep. David was normally a happy, outgoing boy, but now he had become withdrawn, wouldn't do any of his schoolwork or meet up with his friends. He kept describing what was scaring him, and in time was able to give more detail. He said it was a thin man with black eyes and an animal-like face, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns and hooves. Arnie and Debbie continued to clean their house, and things went without incident. But then it seemed the old man did what he threatened to do if they moved in, using David to put that message across loud and clear. David's night terrors grew worse, to the point he started to have them during the daytime as well. They were now more like visions. On one occasion, the family kept calling him down for dinner. When he didn't answer anyone, Debbie decided to go up. She found him standing in the middle of the room, staring at the wall as if in a trance. The family grew concerned as they tried to work out exactly what was going on. But things grew much worse when David started to get scratches and bruises and claimed it was the old man who was hurting him. It was decided that the family should take it in turns to watch over David every night. Debbie thought having another person around would also help, so asked Arnie to come over and stay for a while. They thought if David was telling the truth, then maybe one of them would also see the old man, and then they could figure out what they were dealing with. So every night the family took it in turn to watch over David. It was an unsettling situation because they couldn't work out which was more scarier, that some sort of entity was tormenting David, or, and this is more likely, that David was doing it to himself. Then the reality of the situation became clear when Debbie and her mother were on watch duty. They witnessed David during the night being scratched and beaten by unseen hands. David would also make strange sounds while asleep, guttural growls and reciting Bible passages. He would then wake up and have no recollection of what he said or sounded like. Then something else started to happen. Each one of the family members, including Arnie, swore they would hear someone walking around in the attic when everyone in the home was together. It was the unmistakable sound of someone walking slowly across the creaking floorboards up there. But every time they went up to investigate, there was no one there. The footsteps got louder over time, as if the entity was becoming a bigger presence in the house and in David. Debbie and Arnie asked a Catholic priest to come over to their new rental house to cleanse it, hoping that it would rid David of the issues he was having, as that's where it all started. But it made no difference, which makes sense if the entity was attached to the boy. David's visions continued, so Debbie and Arnie decided to not move into their new rental house, so they ripped up the lease and left the house for good. They now wanted to focus all their attention on David and get rid of whatever it was that had attached itself to him. So they did what everyone else in the Connecticut area would do in the 1980s if they were in this type of situation, and reached out to the world-famous Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were also residents in the city. The Warrens visited the Glatzels' home and at first just sat and observed the situation, and soon they saw and heard the things the family had. Footsteps in the attic, demonic sounds coming from David, and the wounds suddenly appearing on his body, which they could only assume were from the old man entity. They watched as the boy went through violent spasms and convulsions. They went on to conduct 3 lesser exorcisms, meaning without a priest, in an attempt to release David from the evil spirit. All these exorcisms were terrifying for everyone involved. They watched as David levitated, and he even stopped breathing for a short period of time. He would shout profanities at his family as the exorcisms occurred. Then he spoke about a murder that was going to happen in a short time, but of course no one knew what he was talking about. The Glatzel family were extremely stressed at what was happening, and over the course of around 3 weeks the Warrens would continue with their lesser exorcisms. On some days David seemed to be getting a lot better. Then he would revert back to the cursing, screaming boy that was being held by something that was evil and shouldn't exist in the real world. Then, as yet another exorcism was taking place, Arnie couldn't stand the terror the family were going through anymore. The screams from Mrs. Glatzel and Debbie, along with the vicious way David was acting, had now gotten too much for him. So he stepped forward and demanded that the demon possess him instead of the boy, saying, "Take me on, leave my little buddy alone." All those present claimed to have witnessed the demon transfer from David into Arnie. They said they saw a black mist come from David's body. Lorraine Warren said she clearly saw the black mist leave David and enter Arnie's body. At that point, her hands were tied. A demon can take time to take hold of someone, especially someone who is older than a child, and you can't fight off something you can't see. So in order to rid Arnie of the demon, he had to show signs of possession. The Warrens told the family to call them if anything else happened. A few days later, David seemed to be doing a lot better, to the relief of everyone. His colour came back, and he was no longer pale but had a healthy glow. The bruises disappeared, and no more were visible on him. The visions stopped, and he started to eat and want to go out again, so everything seemed to be normal again, at least for a few weeks. Debbie was working at the Brookfield boarding kennel, where she was a dog groomer. Her boss Alan had supported her as she had gone through the very trying time with her family. And although he didn't really know how to take it exactly, he still wasn't sure if it was the truth and her little brother had been possessed, which is understandable. To hear something like that can sound too far-fetched to believe. But he saw the situation had taken a toll on Debbie. She had been so stressed about everything and had lost her rental house in the process. Alan was a kind-hearted man and offered Debbie and Arnie a discount on a rental property that he owned, which was really close to the kennels, basically next door. David was on the mend, Debbie was eager to get out of her parents' house, so from late 1980 she and Arnie moved in. Then over the next few months, something in Arnie began to change. He himself said he didn't feel right. One day, Debbie caught him standing in the middle of the living room, just staring into space, just like she had seen her brother that one time. but Arnie managed to convince her that he was fine, but they were in denial. Having gone through so much with David, they were reluctant to believe it could happen again. Arnie certainly didn't want to believe that the burnt old man had now become part of him, so he hid it and pushed it out of his mind the best he could, even though deep down he knew the inevitable was coming. One day in 1981, while driving home from work, Arnie said that finally this entity got a real hold of him and he felt out of control. On an isolated road, it forced him to jerk the wheel and drive into a tree, but luckily Arnie walked away unharmed. The family believed the demon was trying to kill him, but that didn't appear to be the case. The demon wasn't looking to kill Arnie, it was trying to make itself stronger. A few days later, Arnie found himself driving back to the house they almost rented and where it all started. Now, whether he did this of his own accord or whether the entity made him do it is anyone's guess. Once at the property, he headed out into the garden where there was an old well. He just stood there staring down the well. It was here that he encountered the demon itself in full force. He stared into its eyes, and from that day, nothing would be the same. Arnie felt he would no longer be the kind-hearted young man everyone knew him to be. He was a demon. It had fully taken him over, and he was now possessed. February 16th, 1981 was the day everything happened. Arnie called his work, claiming to be sick and couldn't go in. He felt like doing something else that day. With his sister Wanda and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary, they headed over to hang out with Debbie at the kennel for a while. Wanda and Mary helped Debbie brush the dogs, wash them, and had fun playing with the animals. Alan, Debbie's boss and landlord, was also at the kennels and decided to take everyone out for lunch at the local pizza place. It was here that the first sign of trouble crept in, as Alan had drunk quite a lot of beer and started to say things he maybe shouldn't have said. It was nothing too crazy, but it was enough to annoy Arnie. It ended up with the pair having an exchange of angry words, and the tension was building. When they all returned to the kennels afterwards, the exchange of angry words became a full-blown argument. Debbie tried to take her little cousin out of there before things got too heated, and that's when Alan stood in front of the little girl and refused to let her leave. In his mind, he might have thought he was playing, but it infuriated Arnie. He looked down at the ground before letting out a deep, loud growl, like some sort of possessed animal. It was so strange it stopped everyone talking, and in that brief moment of silence, Arnie took out a small pocket knife and attacked Alan. He was stabbing him over and over again, while screaming the whole time. Wanda tried to pull Arnie away, and Debbie helped her, but he was just too strong, and there was no stopping him. In less than a minute, Alan had been stabbed over 20 times, mainly in the chest and stomach. A few times the knife had pierced the man's heart. He was rushed to hospital, but after a few hours he passed away. The coroner said that 4 or 5 of the blows were utterly devastating, piercing Alan's vital organs, and there was one wound that sliced all the way down from his heart to his belly. Arnie tried to run away, but was apprehended about 2 miles away from the scene. Sergeant Gordon Fairchild from the Brookfield Police Department was there on scene, and he said that Arnie told him that he didn't mean to kill anyone, and he was unable to remember anything. In the local jailhouse, while in custody, and after finding Alan had passed away, Arnie spoke in complete gibberish for a few minutes before he fell asleep in his cell for the next half an hour. When he woke up, he was officially charged with first-degree murder, and this weird story would mark the first murder ever in Brookfield's 193-year history. The day after the killing, Lorraine Warren would inform the police that Arnie had not done this himself, that he was in fact possessed, and she told them the whole story. The trial that eventually followed captivated the world's attention, as the defence lawyer claimed that the accused was possessed by demons at the time of the killing. However, the judge said that due to the lack of evidence the defence made, it was impossible to prove in a court of law, so it was quickly dismissed. As a result, Arnie was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But he got out early due to good behaviour and only served 5 years. While in prison, Arnie received an education and got married to Debbie, and life for him and David eventually went back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after all this. As to why the demons suddenly decided to leave Arnie without any intervention is anyone's guess. Of course, the most logical explanation is that he was never possessed in the first place. But the timing was just right when he killed Alan and decided to use the devil made me do it plea. Or it could be that the demon got what he wanted and after the killing it simply moved on. Or perhaps, since Debbie and Arnie never did move into that old house, the demon kept its word and eventually left them alone. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.